heaven? No. It's Iowa.
Hello and welcome to the All Good Stories podcast, where we believe all good stories belong to Jesus. And when we look for Jesus in the stories around us, we find him more fully in our own. We're your hosts, Chris Bowden
and Simon Campbell, two millennial dads who love pop culture and making connections from the content we love to the God who loves us.
And in episode 15, we're going to go the distance as we find the good stories in Field of Dreams. It is officially time for us to jump into the quintessential Iowan movie, the Iowan movie
Yes.
of legend, the Midwestern hero that is Field of Dreams.
Yes, I can't wait because I think this is one that I watched again and hadn't watched for a long, long time. And there's so much magic here. And this is a very strange movie, and somehow it works.
Rewatching it now as an adult, I went, oh, this is bizarre. Different moments of this movie. But we're very excited. We are both Iowans. We both grew up on the eastern side of Iowa, which grows our bias, I think, for Field of Dreams even more.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know about you, but it was a tradition in school that there'd usually be 1 year in elementary school that you'd take a trip to the Field of Dreams in Dyersville, Iowa. And so, spoiler alert, if you've never seen the Field of Dreams before, we're going to hit you with it now. It takes place in Dyersville, Iowa.
Yes.
This is unlike our friends in California or New York or Florida, where a lot of movies take place.
Yes.
One's ours. This is one of the few.
And I think because we grew up as 90s kids going to school during the time when this would have still been relevant, this was a big deal to go to the Field of Dreams, to have something that we get to claim like this in Iowa. But I'm excited for this conversation because I think in a lot of ways, this movie sets up a lot of opportunity for conversations because it's so spiritual and strange.
No matter what your religious background may be, it has such a spiritual element to this
mystical
movie.
Almost, right?
Mystical is a great way to say it. And so, Simon, some of us may not have seen Field of Dreams in a little while. Came out back in 1989, 1990, right at the dawn of the 90s. So take us back and remind us what Field of Dreams is actually all about.
Field of Dreams follows Ray Kinsella, a farmer in Iowa who hears a mysterious voice urging him to build a baseball diamond in his cornfield. Despite sharp skepticism from his family and neighbors, Ray plows under his crops to create the field, believing that somehow it will bring back the baseball legend Shoeless Joe Jackson. Following a series of vision and prompts, Ray is taken on a strange and at times corny journey that leads him into deeper discoveries of belief. And while at times he struggles to play ball with the bizarre nature of his calling that may cost him everything, Ray finds something far more valuable on the field of his dreams and ends up creating a place of redemption for many.
Yes, you leaned in hard in this one. I feel like we got not one, not two, but like three little puns or dad jokes hiding in there. So,
I'm just trying to hit it where it's pitched here and loft you a few softballs, to hit.
You're going to learn so quickly just how little I understand about baseball. And it's going to be tough for me.
I hope that those didn't come out too far out of left field. Wouldn't want to hit a foul ball here to start off our episode, but I thought I would just...
Yeah, more baseball terms. You're out of here.
Stop it. Get some help.
That was a disaster. So released in 1989, 7 years after the book that it was based on. This movie is based on a book, actually. It's a 1982 magic realist novel.
Those things seem like oxymorons.
It's a perfect setup, really. A magic realist novel called Shoeless Joe by W.P. Kinsella. It was written just in 1982. This movie was made in 1988, 1989. And so these are really not that far apart from the moment that you get the original content and a screenplay that's been adapted out of that. And so the author, W.P. Kinsella, which if you've caught the traces here,
Kinsella, there you go.
Ray Kinsella, the main character, same last name. And in the book, same last name as well. He was consulted throughout the writing of the screenplay, the writing of the script, by the writer and director, Phil Alden Robinson, throughout. So
Cool.
This is very faithful to the source material. They were able to kind of work through these details as they adapted his original work to the screen for the movies, which is really, really cool. And quick detail about the name of the movie is that the director wanted to use the name Shoeless Joe, the same as the book, but an executive decision was made for it to be called Field of Dreams instead, which he, at the time, said he just did not like. And turns out the author actually shared that he planned for the novel to be called The Dream Field until his publisher basically forced the title Shoeless Joe instead.
Oh, that's funny. So like a reversal.
There's like this cycle of names that are just like not what I wanted or was looking for, but kind of gets this redemptive moment, at least for the author, to go, it may not be the Dream Field, but it is Field of Dreams, what's come to be known as today. So to get to the Iowa pride of it all here.
Oh, yes, please.
This film was shot in Dubuque County, Iowa. It was also filmed at a farm near Dyersville, Iowa, where the Kinsella house and field itself was and is now still today. And that field actually has been expanded upon now here recently over time. The original field is still there, but Major League Baseball and some other investors came in and built a larger full-size baseball field where there was an actual MLB game. That was such a cool experience to be broadcast nationally from Iowa at the Field of Dreams.
Baseball is, I think, the most nostalgic of major sports. And so, like, I think for them to lean into that and doing something like this with the Field of Dreams and tying itself to that is a unique and powerful choice. And it was really cool. As Iowans, we all heard about that. We're so proud every time somebody talks about it. Like, it's just great. That's our cornfield.
So filmed out there in Dyersville, Iowa, along with, not to be forgotten, an empty warehouse in Dubuque, which is where most of the interior sets and areas were shot. And then Galena, Illinois, where Moonlight Graham's character, that doctor, was located. And then last but not least, they did do a week filming out in Boston to actually film at Fenway Park. That is actually at Fenway in Boston. And fun fact, Matt Damon and Ben Affleck, the Boston brothers that they are in acting, were teenagers at the time of this movie and were actually extras on set in the Fenway Park scene.
Oh, no way. That's a cool start.
Wow.
A couple other fun production details in here that, of course, I'm going to nerd out on because they're all connected back to home here. Is that the interior scenes of the movie were shot first because the cornfield that was planted by the filmmakers was taking too long to grow. And they started filming this in May. And if you've been close to any Iowan or Midwesterner with corn at all, you would know that in Iowa. And so in order for this corn to get to Kevin Costner's height so he can stand out in this field, they had to bring in irrigation systems to be used in order to water the corn so it would grow faster to fit in their production time.
That's awesome. Waiting on corn to grow. I love that.
And then one of the more iconic scenes is in the closing of the movie as they pan out away from the Field of Dreams. Really, the proof in the pudding at the end of the movie that if you build it, they will come. People start to arrive to watch baseball. As this pans out into the night, you see miles of headlights of people who have shown up to watch baseball. And it is such a cool shot. First, because it just looks awesome. Secondly, because we're living in the world of the late 80s, early 90s. That is a real shot. Those are all real cars. And so the director of the movie actually approached the Iowa Chamber of Commerce about this scene at the end of the movie. And the Chamber of Commerce said it can be done. And so this became a community event. And so the call went out to all of these Iowans to say, hey, we need you to drive out to this baseball diamond in order to film this shot. And so a production assistant for the movie drove from the set where the baseball diamond was at into town in Dyersville and measured the distance and estimated it would take about 1,500 cars to fill the shot in that distance. And so when it was time to shoot, the town was actually blacked out. That evening, they turned off the power in the town. So it looked like a dark field in the distance. And then everybody showed up and got their cars in a lineup for miles. And then the last fun detail to make this production work was that the drivers were told to keep switching between their low beams and high beams on their cars continuously in order to provide the effect that the cars were moving along the road. So if you've ever seen a car at a distance and, the lights kind of naturally flicker as they move, that was their way of getting that effect of movement of those cars. So it just wasn't stationary. It had this effect in its production, which is really, really cool.
That's an amazing story. And it sounds and just feels like Iowans. Like, yeah, we're going to show up for that.
And there's this amazing kind of meta factor of the movie, I think, where it's like, if you build it, they will come, right? If you film a movie in Iowa, people are going to show up for you. They're going to show up for that movie. And then the call goes out that we need help filming this scene for this movie. And people showed up. They did. It's like they got to live out a part of that movie that is forever documented in that way,
and
which
I think
is really
the craziness of this movie in and of itself, like what we talked about, there is some strangeness to it, but there's just some belovedness to it that people are still traveling to this spot in Eastern Iowa to come see this place. And it's so fun to watch the theme of the movie still having that same attractional power to it, right?
Which I think really is a big part of the movie magic, is that this monologue that Terrence Mann gives as a character saying, people will come, Ray. They won't know why, but they will. There's this certain sentimentality of life or a certain way of living that feels lost or forgotten that they're going to come out and be searching for. I'm like, well, isn't this movie relevant for 2024? You know, I was like, there is this kind of eternal sense, whether it's a cornfield or baseball or nostalgia or sentiment or Americana, there is this kind of wild thing that isn't just being lived out in this movie because it's based in just enough realism. It is being lived out in real life because of this movie. It's created and perpetuated a little bit of that itself.
Yes, this movie is deeper than baseball and cornfields. There's something deeper about it, and that's why it's a good story, and that's why I'm really excited to talk about it.
Me too.
And a little bit of movie magic for me in this was the writing, the poetry, the richness of the dialogue in some of these spots, which I just learned from you that this is adapted from an original written work, and you can see how that would come through. And when you put lines of poetry like what you give an actor like James Earl Jones, that's magic, man. I mean, I don't care who you are. That's magic. So I think that's one of the things that stood out to me most is just bringing poetry and artistic license to the script and allowing that poetry to evoke these nostalgic feelings around baseball.
Yeah, not only do you have the actual imagery, pacing, cinematography to do it, you also really do have the writing to go along with it. You and I are both big Lord of the Rings nerds.
What about breakfast?
And then also now Rings of Power nerds.
What about second breakfast?
And what it reminded me of, strangely enough, was if you're watching Rings of Power, and if you're a fan of it, you probably lean into pacing of shows where they take their time to let it cook a little bit.
Okay.
Like the scenes are a little more drawn out. We're going to make sure we emphasize a little bit more writing and dialogue.
Yeah.
We're going to lean into cinematography and pacing to define setting a little bit. The dark side I've heard of that from people with Rings of Power is, quote, it's boring. It doesn't move fast enough, right?
Yeah.
And you could probably argue the same for Field of Dreams in some ways, right? The very beginning of the movie is just like slow pan over the cornfield.
Yeah.
It takes its time.
There's a ton of
space.
There's a ton of space in this movie, even in between patches of dialogue and traveling between places. There's a ton of space. This movie breathes absolutely and allows for some thought around some deep phrases. But I think the other part of movie magic for me, in addition to the poetry, is that it just evokes this multisensory nature of baseball. It's like when Shoeless Joe is talking about what he loved about the game, he's talking about the smell of his glove, the smell of the ball, the feeling of the grass on his feet. When something is precious to you, and what the makers of this movie, and by extension, the author of that book, is trying to evoke this total sensory experience of something that they love. And so I think that's
super cool.
The poetry and the multi-sensory nature of it, even in the cinematography and some of the things that you're talking about, like the gravel on the ground that you can hear their feet when they're about to step over that line to help care. And all those different things are really cool details that I think bring magic, and that has allowed a movie like this to stand up for so long.
A little bit of the movie magic for me is that Iowa looks beautiful in this movie. Like, that's movie magic. I think for you and I both who live in this state, we get it when we talk about Iowa sunsets.
Yeah.
When you're out in a field, when you are driving home and you just see that sun start to set and you get that rainbow effect through the sky, where you get these colors you would never see otherwise. And there's something about a sea of green that just kind of moves with the wind. I mean, there's something that I think as Americans feels nostalgic and connected to our heritage and history, but as Iowans for us in particular, I long for that feeling at different times. And I feel like we actually get that represented really, really well when Kevin Costner's standing outside listening for that voice, right? Or they're standing in the cornfield toward twilight or sunset is just a piece of that I love gets represented for people who don't live in this area, who may not experience that otherwise. I'm like, oh guys, that's a little bit of the magic. That's why we stick around in this nowhere place that everyone talks about.
Well, I do think there is magic to that. There's magic to standing in an open area where you can see miles in every direction. I mean, those of us who have agricultural connections in our family, we know the silence of a farm. Not everybody does. We know the relative silence of a cornfield. We feel the openness and the space and the calm of those places. And I think this movie captures it. But the strangeness of it makes you lean in a little bit. Makes you
really does.
Like, what is going on here? And even despite the slower pace, despite the amount of space in this movie, a lot of times you do kind of lean in.
So that's just a little bit of movie magic, things that we love nerding out about and details we love, especially with our Iowan movie. So just a couple fun details that we love to dig into there. But really what we're here to do is talk about what in this movie belongs to Jesus. Where do we see his character, his message, his heart? Where do we see God's plan or story at work or on display? So it can help us make those connections to have spiritual conversations, whether that's with our kids, our friends, or our family. And so let's talk about what we think in this movie uniquely belongs to Jesus.
One of the things that jumps out to me right away is this idea of visions, the importance of visions, of dreams in terms of guiding someone. I think that there's a ton of huge connections to the biblical story wherever you're going in the scriptures of people seeing visions, whether that's Gideon or Samuel.
Or just a voice of the Lord or a representative of God speaking to someone. Similarly, I had thought about the story of Abraham starting out saying there's going to be this plan that works out through you that you're going to go and activate on and do something about.
Yeah, and I think that that's absolutely, this idea of visions and stuff is important. There's one verse that I think, as I was finishing the movie, this verse popped out to me. And like, this is totally out of context. This is not what this verse is meant to mean. But it was such a unique overlay with the story of the Field of Dreams. It's used in two places. It originates in Joel chapter 2, verse 28, but it's also in Acts 2 in the scene of Pentecost. And it says, your young men will see visions and your old men will dream dreams. Talking about the day of the Lord, talking about the coming of the kingdom of God. And I think that is such a cool way to describe this movie. We have Ray Kinsella, who's a relatively young man, farmer, young family, who's seeing visions. And we have old men that have regrets that even are long past are dreaming dreams.
Whether it's a Terrence Mann in the present life towards the end of his life or these figures from the far past.
And the reason I think that this is an opportunity, something that belongs to Jesus, is because the point of that passage in Acts chapter 2 in Pentecost, when Peter is quoting Joel about the day of the Lord here, he's describing when the Spirit will descend upon all sons and daughters, and we will receive direct communication from God. We can now hear and understand God and partner with him in a way no generation of believers before has been able to. God has made his dwelling among us. His Spirit is with us. And now we can see the kingdom of heaven come to earth. And I think that when you look at the story of the Field of Dreams, that idea of young men seeing visions and old men dreaming dreams, that's what we're seeing happening. It's not the voice of God, but it very well could be for the purposes of the story. He's speaking to Ray and he's receiving direct communication, direct guidance, things that still seem crazy, but he can act on and create this place where kind of heaven meets earth, where we can see the overlap, the interlocking, the intersection of heaven and earth, where redemption happens, where pains are ceased, right? Like these incredible, miraculous, unbelievable things happen as a result of his vision and this direct communication from God. So as believers in Jesus, we live in an era where we can hear a word from God, where we can receive direct communication, connection, and be led by the Spirit of God to be bringing essentially the kingdom of heaven to earth. We believe in the intersection of those things, and we want to participate in what God is doing and live into it.
Yeah, that's really well said. And what I had written here was pretty similar, thinking about that iconic quote from this movie. If you build it, he will come. And it has a bit of a condition tied to it. If you build it, he will come. If you do this.
Yeah.
And I think in a lot of these, like we can get a vision or a voice or a hint or a nudge from God. And it's not kind of a loaded deal. God gives us freedom and free will to make decisions of our own.
Sure.
But there's so many things in our lives where it's like, hey, if you do this, if you follow me, if you step out in obedience, if you believe that what I say is true, here's the opportunity that comes with it.
Yes.
And I think of Genesis 12, 1-4, you've got the story of Abraham where God makes him a promise. He goes, go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you, and I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse, and all the peoples on earth will be blessed through you. If you go, if you build it, here's what I'm going to do. I will bless all these people through your obedience and your belief in what I'm about to do.
Yeah.
And thank the Lord, Abraham did it. And so then I think about what happens in Ray's story, right? He has to go out on a risk and say, hey,
and it's not a given thing. It's conditional on, he has a choice here, doesn't he?
That's exactly right. He has to go and say, the only way that I am making money where I live is these crops. And I'm going to decimate a portion of them so that I can build this thing that I heard in a vision. And just like I thought of when Noah was building an ark, where all these people are like, what are you doing, you fool? Like, why are you building this boat? Like, what do you think is going to happen?
That looked foolish for a long time. Yeah, 100%.
Long time. Yeah, you read that in the Bible. It's like this short little snippet. I'm like, guys, you realize how long it must take to build this giant thing with the tools that were available? That is a long haul project. And so I just think about how easy it probably is for us to become discouraged or start to feel crazy or feel like, did I actually hear that? Is that really what you want me to do?
Yeah.
Or we find that when God asks us to do something, at least in my life, rarely has it been super, super simple or super easy.
I love that, to your point, in the movie, after the field is built, Joe doesn't arrive right away. This doesn't happen right away.
This doesn't get resolved after I finish it. The story
This has a whole winter. He's got to replant. Like, all of this stuff happens, and he has a long time for people to be like, you're crazy.
Even as he's experiencing the thing that was promised to him, like Shoeless Joe Jackson is there. All of these guys have shown up and are playing baseball. The thing is happening. The thing has happened. And he could still lose his home because he did it. The risk is still there. The risk is still happening. He could still lose the farm. And so I just think of that as an encouragement. If anybody's out there following what God's asking them to do, good job. Keep going. And don't be surprised when cost is involved, when trials are involved. You and I were in a meeting recently, and a quote that kind of stuck out to me was, death has always been a part of the story. Don't be surprised when it shows up in your own. I'm like, oh, okay, in order for these things to happen, it costs something somewhere. You can't have everything. There's always an opportunity cost. And so you're evaluating what is most important and what is the voice that I'm going to trust and lean into and go to at the end of the day above anything else.
I mean, you're absolutely right. There's a cost to this calling, and there are lots of times in the midst of things that we feel like we're being obedient to, something that God has called us to do. There's lots of opportunities for it to feel foolish, for it to feel completely counterintuitive, completely unwise.
And have some outward voices who are going to make it very clear why this isn't an unwise decision at times too.
And the cost at times will seem too high, like too much. And I love the tension that's built throughout with this, that there is a cost to pursuing this calling or pursuing this vision. And I think that that's something that is very true of our lives as Christians and followers of Jesus as well.
Another big theme that you had hinted at already for me in this movie was the whole idea of reconciliation. At its core, this film is about the reconciliation between Ray and his father. They had a strained and then estranged relationship with his dad that ultimately finds healing on the baseball field at the end of the movie. Like, you want to have a catch? And I kind of had to go back and connect the dots because the movie does not make it super clear or plain, but because he read one of Terrence Mann's books, kind of sent him in a new trajectory or a different direction, kind of showed him something, either about
or something like
his
that.
dad or I think like a lot of us do in our own family of origins. We get exposed to something as we grow a little bit, and it challenges our assumptions or challenges what we thought we knew about our community or our family or our set of beliefs. beliefs and really kind of drove this estrangement. And to call it back to the Iowa of it all, I think a lot of Iowan teenagers get into the spot of like, I'm going to leave my small town and go out into like the real world.
I'm going to get out of here.
Yeah, I'm going to escape. And he does. He goes to Berkeley because he said it's the college furthest from home.
Yeah.
He's going to go run away and get out of there. And it really could have set up what could have been this like prodigal son kind of moment. Come home, I'm going to come back. I mean, like a lot of Iowans also will turn around and come back to some sort of small town when it's time to have kids. There's kind of this trajectory that can occur with people because you realize what that does offer. You find the beauty in that. But his dad passes before that reconciliation can really take place. And this is what's hanging over him throughout the movie. And so what I thought of was just 2 Corinthians 5:18-19, where it's all this is from God who reconciled us to himself through Christ and gave us the ministry of reconciliation. That God was reconciling the world to himself in Christ, not counting people's sins against them. And he has committed to us the message of reconciliation. We get to be a part of that reconciliation in the world. We get to be a part of that story and in that journey, both in ourselves, in our relationships, and with others. And so you have this in multiple ways, I think, in the movie. You have it with Ray and his dad. You ultimately see that as the big narrative theme here. Yep. You also see it in Terrence Mann's character as he's become a recluse and has to kind of reconcile his life choices and what this means for him now. Also for these baseball players who, whether rightly or wrongly accused of what they did or didn't do in the baseball world back in the early 1900s. You have Shoeless Joe Jackson's character. They all have an opportunity to reconcile, to have a fresh start, to make it right, which is what Christ offers all of us. Yeah. It's what Jesus has made possible to each of us. Say, hey, you got this wrong. You screwed this up. You've fallen short. You have regrets. Yeah. You have things you wish you could take back, things you wish you could do differently that otherwise in the world are what they are. But God offers something different. This baseball field offers something different. It offers the opportunity for this reconciliation to take place. It has created the environment. It's created the relationships, all the pieces that are required for these relationships to be healed. In the same way where I go, once you are in a relationship with Jesus, when you say yes, when you jump in, the Holy Spirit arrives. Every ingredient that's necessary for reconciled relationships, reconciled thoughts, reconciled health, all of these things in our lives are possible because all of the ingredients are there now through God's power, through God's work. As we follow him, learn about him, lean in with him, he's going to take us where we need to go to reconcile all things.
And I think right along this idea, it's kind of playfully done in a couple different spots. And all of us Iowans love this line of when the ball players ask, is this heaven? He said, no, it's Iowa. I think that this idea of this field of dreams being heaven is a place that belongs to Jesus because of what I mentioned earlier of like, this is an intersection of where kind of heaven meets earth. This is a place that's in between where both things are present. And heaven is a place where all wrongs are righted, where pain and regret is no more, where dreams come true, as the movie says. And it just reminded me of, it kind of evoked this memory of Revelation 21:4 that describes this arrival of the kingdom of heaven. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away. And so as we watch these players who come to the field of dreams that in life had regrets, pain, unfulfilled dreams, they come to the field of dreams to play. And the other thing of this kind of intersection that reminded me of this is like, not everybody at the field of dreams can witness this beautiful intersection.
Oh,
right?
Man.
The brother-in-law who's trying to shake Ray out of this.
Trying to help.
Trying to help.
He's trying to help him do the right thing.
Trying to bring reason to this situation and save the livelihood of this family. He can't see the ball players playing. He can't see this intersection of heaven coming to earth. And there's a lot of things where we are doing something as Christians that feels so counterintuitive, so crazy, that others can't see that intersection of heaven and earth happening right now. They can't see what would possibly motivate somebody to do these crazy things. But those who can see, those who see heaven coming to earth are drawn in, renewed, and restored. And this line, this poetry uttered by James Earl Jones, it reminds us of all that is good and could be again.
And what that made me think of was the last piece of what I think belongs to Jesus that jumped right out to me was, again, kind of the action piece on our part as believers in Jesus, where not only is God all about creating these spaces where heaven and earth meet, but he calls us to be a part of that work. We aren't Christians in this world now just to wait for heaven. We aren't just sitting around waiting for Jesus to come back, waiting to die one day.
I like that. Yeah,
what
a
terrible existence that would be, honestly. Like, no, we have a purpose, and it is to love God, love your neighbor. And as we do that, or when we're doing that, we are creating a space where creation, the world as it is now, and heaven intersect. We are preparing a place. We are helping to build the kingdom of heaven here and now. It's a part of our opportunity. It's a part of our responsibility as Christians. And so I think about Ray's character. He has built a place that captures a heart of that. We watch this. We can sense what that feels like. We sense what that looks like. We see what it's doing to people. And I go, where are you creating those environments in your own life? Where are you creating places where heaven and earth uniquely intersect, uniquely meet? And you may not be building a baseball field in a cornfield, right? Yeah. But it could be that you are creating a safe space where people can just show up in your house and they can crash land. That is a place that God is all over. We all need a place where we can go and not be judged or not be worried about what people are going to think. Or I think about, where are the places where you slow down? Where are the places where you're more present? Where are the places where you are most gracious and most kind? Yeah. These moments where you choose to step out and serve someone else and you build a relationship, or you grow in your empathy, or you go in your perspective. Like, these are places where heaven and earth collide, where they meet. And that's holy ground that I think we see captured in this field and in this obedience, you could say, that Ray is having, where I go, that's our job.
Yeah,
that's what we're here to do.
100%. I love that so much, because Jesus taught his followers to pray the prayer, "Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven." Right? We are to pursue that. We are to be praying that all the time. And I think that when we partner in that, it sounds silly, but we can be a part of bringing heaven to earth.
It's pretty cool to look ahead and go, I'm going to continue to be able to find opportunities. God will be faithful to provide opportunities where I get to catch glimpses of heaven here on earth. And how cool is that? Yeah. How cool is that?
Like, great.
He says, come follow me, and you're going to see the kingdom of heaven right here, right now. And wow, what a privilege. What an opportunity. Right now, go think back and go, like, what moments in your life have you seen heaven here on earth? Where has that shown up? And how can you make more of that? How can you see more of that? What's your field? What's your dream? Like, where are you creating fields of dreams in your life?
One of the things that I look at this story, this movie, as a place where it belongs to Jesus, as an opportunity for conversation, is just the nature of this crazy calling, these voices, these visions. And there's this great line that I was like, this is a belong to Jesus moment. When Ray is talking to his wife, they're in conflict kind of over the farm, over these details of what's happening. And he says, when primal forces of nature tell you to do something, the prudent thing to do is not quibble over the details. Because they're trying to figure out what's happening, right?
What a great line that you just plucked out of the air there from that. Oh, man.
And switch the primal forces of nature with God, and you have a profound spiritual statement.
Yeah, say it again for the people in the back.
Okay, so I'm going to switch out God in this one. When God tells you to do something, the prudent thing to do is not quibble over the details.
Oh, man.
Right? And if we, as followers of Jesus...
that isn't the most convicting thing I've heard all week. Golly, man.
When we have a clear call from God to do something, it may not be as dramatic as a vision, may not be as inspiring or mystical as a dream. But when God uses these things to call us to something, no matter how crazy it is, the prudent thing to do is not quibble over the details, because we see over and over through the story of Scripture, God does crazy things. God does things that breaks all of our intuitions, that is counterintuitive, to show us his majesty, so we could say only God could do that. And Jesus calls his disciples, take up your cross and follow me. Do something completely counterintuitive. Be willing to lay this down for this crazy calling, because only God is going to call you into spaces like that. So this crazy calling, I think, is something that absolutely belongs to Jesus, and a rich place for spiritual discussion.
The last thing for me that I think belongs to Jesus is a pretty quick one, but it's always a good reminder. It's in Terrence Mann's monologue, where he goes, they'll come out for reasons they can't even fathom. It's money they have and peace they lack. People will come, Ray. They will most definitely come. And I just think we live in a world where it is money that we have, if we think about it, maybe more in this time than ever.
Mm-hmm.
And it's peace we lack. And I just think, hey, you may be making more money than you ever thought you would. You may be pretty stable. You may be in a good spot. You may have a lot of good things around you. Great house. The things that you probably had on the list that you checked, like house, dog, family, grandkids, whatever. Cool. The American dream.
Yeah.
Right?
Got it.
Well, people tell you need to be happy. And it's peace you lack. And people are longing for that. I'm longing for that. Like, where is my peace to be found? Right. And it is not in all these other things the world wants to say that they're in. It's not in my home. It's not in my salary. It's not in having enough in my 401k by the time I'm 62. It's not in my wife. It's not in my daughter. Like, this is not where I'm going to find that. It's not my accolades. It's not in my job satisfaction, or the promotion I do or don't get.
Yeah.
And God alone, am I going to find that peace that's over all understanding? Right? Like, that is over all other things. We're in the midst of any sort of thing, the highs, the lows, the in-betweens, that consistent presence of God saying, I see you. I love you. I got you. I have given everything for you so that we can be in this thing together. I just go, people will come, Ray. People will most definitely come for that.
Another thing I see that belongs to Jesus is this idea that the central hero around which the story kind of centers, this shoeless Joe Jackson, if you build it, he will come, who lives at the center of this reconciliation between Ray and his father. This hero is treated as a criminal. He's banned from baseball because of being accused of taking money to throw a game. And, the history of this character, this actual historical character, is so hotly debated, and because of his play and because of a lot of circumstances surrounding this, there's a ton of debate whether or not he did anything that would warrant him being banned from baseball. But he's accused and treated as a criminal. And the thing that Ray says to his father before he left is like, I could never respect a man whose hero was a criminal. Shoeless Joe, wrongfully accused. This hero, treated like a criminal, is what brings Ray and his father back together. And despite the fact that Joe played a nearly perfect series, 12 base hits, a record that would take many, many, many years to break, and batting average, all the different things, no signs of showing that game, played perfectly. Jesus lived the perfect life, yet died a criminal's death. And, we see in John 18:30, when Jesus is being brought before Pilate, being accused by the chief priests, Pilate came out to them and asked the chief priests, what charges are you bringing against this man? And all they said was, if he were not a criminal, would we have not handed him over to you? He's a criminal.
And that's your hero? That's your
hero.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of times that we look at the treatment of Jesus as a criminal, this hero of ours treated as criminal. This is a rich place that belongs to Jesus, because I think that when we recognize that Jesus lived the perfect life, yet died the criminal's death, and he did that for us so that we might be reconciled to our Heavenly Father, that's where we can begin to give our story to Jesus, where we can belong to Jesus, when we recognize that that's what he's done for us so that we might live, we might experience the kingdom of heaven and be reconciled to our Heavenly Father, no matter what we've said, no matter what we've done. That is the good story that belongs to Jesus that he wants to write in your life if you let him.
Now it's time for some Love It or Leave It, an opportunity for us to talk about what we loved in this movie and what we could have done without along the way.
I'm so ready. What do you have?
I mean, I'm going to mess with this movie a little bit.
Okay.
Is going the crux of the conflict in this, kind of the turning point of this movie, is a girl choking on a hot dog. Love it or leave it that this is the plot device that's going to turn the corner in all of this.
Okay, I love that it causes Moonlight Graham to decide to leave the field, and he's deciding that he's got to live his dream of staring down a major league pitcher. He's ready to step back into who he was, never regretted being a doctor, all that kind of stuff. He becomes Doc Graham. I will say that the whole falling off the bleachers, and it's like a silent, and she just does. It's like that is like an awkward.
It takes you out of the moment, like the way that they chose to film that and do that. 'Cause I don't know if there's a slow mo effect of her falling off or not, but it feels like there is.
I don't think there is. It's just like I don't think there's any exclamation by the characters. No parent is going to have their child fall off a bleacher and not have any kind of exclamation.
Simon, this was the late 80s. You know, people were still like, come home when, you know, the streetlights turn on or whatever. We don't know. And that was another part I was going to bring up was he walks off the field, and that's apparently a rule that we can't break, right? Like, when is this explained? When is this in the rule book of Ghost Lives? You know, it's like, oh, sorry, you wandered off the grass. Now you can't come back. You can't play baseball anymore. I get the symbolism and I get like what that's telling us in the story. But like practically I look at that and I go like, what is happening here?
And especially because Doc Graham, the Moonlight character, accompanies them across the country. Like, he's clearly existed outside of this line on the gravel, and then all of a sudden, he can't cross it again.
I can't think about it too much.
All right, so a Love It or Leave It for me was the Iowa City shout out that exists in this movie.
Remind me, what is the Iowa City shout out that exists?
Well, James Earl Jones, I think he says something along the lines, or somebody says, maybe it was Karen. She's like, they'll come from Iowa City because it's boring. And they'll come out to the Field of Dreams. I'm almost certain of it. They call Iowa City boring in some way, shape, or form. I was like, no, you can't be bored in Iowa City.
I don't know. If you don't like drinking, what is there for you?
Oh, come on. Chris Bowden. Get out.
Okay, so you got Hawkeye football and, you know, women's basketball right now. What else you got? Come on, man. Iowa City, let's go.
You have got the Hancher Auditorium with a ton of great productions that come through there.
Okay, yeah,
you've got the farmers market. You've
like every other town in Iowa, farmers market.
No. This is different. This is a different level of farmers market. You've got an incredible, like the Old Cap Mall area, the walkable downtown, all of this stuff, cool like Old Capitol. You've got the river that runs right through town, and City Park there is huge. Iowa City is amazing. Get out.
I actually really do like it. Yeah, okay. You got anything nice to say about Ames?
No. Okay, Chris, Love It or Leave It, the heavy dose of pan flute throughout the whole music score.
So for the rest of us humans out there in the world, Simon, define pan flute for me first.
Well, it's the flute that is like staggered little tiny flutes that slowly get longer. I think it's like a South American thing originally, but it gets woven into a bunch of different music styles. Kind of like a little bit of like very breathy, warbly wood flute kind of sounding thing.
Oh, right.
So it kind of has this almost ethereal kind of contrasting sound compared to a little bit of like...
What is this?
Synthesizer
what is this
piano.
Music appreciation class right now? Did you like the
pan
flute?
I'm just trying to make it clear for people who are going to hear you say pan flute and go,
what? Bro, what are you talking about, man?
I think more people know what I mean when I say pan flute than you
Google
think.
It while they're driving and risk their lives. It'll be great. And I think it works because it has a little bit of that like otherworldly feel or contrasting instrumentation. I love that it leans a little bit into the vibe of ethereal 80s music. That is a love it for me, actually. You know, joking aside, I think it is a really good vibe. I think it does hint at something that feels mystical, and it helps add to that whole environment. Love It or Leave It, what can almost feel like the random book banning scene that we get in the middle of the Field of Dreams.
I don't know.
You're stepping into loaded territory.
I am.
That's what I'm
really careful. I was like, I've got to be careful in this because it's like it feels like such an antiquated conversation, but there are like, I mean, we're still talking about censorship in school, and it's a very
however you want to look at it. Those are conversations that are happening right now, and for me, I think I kind of love it because it's so relevant right now. It's like you would watch this movie and go like, oh, those are real conversations that are happening. People are getting together in gymnasiums and talking about whether a book should be allowed in school or not.
Basically, the road to Terrence Mann as a character in this movie leads through a book burning conversation in a town hall.
Grab your torch and pitchforks!
I mean, there are parts of it that I love. I love the little spew of insults they throw back at each other, and I also love how his wife is like all jacked up.
Yeah,
felt like the 60s again or whatever. Yeah,
it's fun because they're these Iowa farmers, but then you remember it's like, oh, they went to Berkeley, right? Like, oh, okay, yeah, they went to these Ivy League schools and have read up on these different things. So you get like these dimensions of character a a little bit for them.
Stick
that I think
it to the man. Yeah.
There we go. Yeah. Them and their liberal arts education. But I actually really did like having it in there because I think it does capture a little bit of small Midwestern towns, having to navigate as a community. How do we want to teach our kids and what is important to us and what matters in a way that I don't know if you get that in larger cities of like the system's the system. What we do is what we do. Whereas here it's like, no, you're in a small town. Like there's a lot of influence you can have and opportunities you have to be a part of these structures and conversations that I really like.
Love it or leave it, Chris. The cornfield scenes where Kevin Costner's in the corn, tending his corn by hand.
He really loves his crops, Simon. Okay. He's so concerned that he will walk and check on each one individually, is what I picked up on. He's a very inefficient farmer, but man, is he nurturing. I love the fact that you get him out there in that environment. I get why they're doing it. I absolutely leave it because it's the most impractical and unrealistic approach to farming anyone has ever seen.
Yes. Like, I mean, he's with a fork or something trying to, dig around the roots, like imagining like he's going to do that to every plant. No, there's nobody in farming that is
even
doing
in
that.
The smallest of farms. You could get me to plant like 2 rows of corn in my backyard.
Yes.
The whole like 800 square foot of it.
Yes.
And I would look and I go, I'm not doing that.
That one that he digs out the root system to look at it for a little bit. And it's like, okay, all right, cool.
He's in the corner of his field where he's testing different pesticides. That's what he's doing. He's checking on like, what's the effectiveness of this? It's like, this is an ad.
However, because I love the movie so much and that it's in Iowa so much, we can overlook some of the realism details in terms of the farming methods because that's not what matters here.
Well, Simon, all good things must come to an end, including this episode. You could say, time for us to walk into the cornfield.
Yes, and thanks again for joining us for episode 15. We hope that this has been a fun conversation for you, but our greatest desire is that this is doing for you what it's doing for us, shaping the way we watch movies and sparking spiritual conversations around them.
And we would love to keep the conversation going with you because there's all sorts of other good stories and awesome nuances to explore. And you can track us down to talk about your thoughts, your insights, your questions on Instagram or on Facebook at All Good Stories Podcast. We would love to keep the conversation going and keep learning from you.
And remember, all good stories belong to Jesus.
And if you choose to give your story to Jesus, you can be sure he'll make it a good one.